Recently, I've bought these huge slabs and I'm going to be making tables out of them. But before I can get started on that, I need to flatten them. And this is one of the most challenging things in a small workshop such as mine. So this is my new workshop in which I will have to flatten these slabs. The tool I'm going to use is a router jig. It's basically just two flat sticks on which you can ride a router sled, and the router takes off the top layer of wood. This makes the surface that has been routed really flat. To let you guys see better, I chose this black plank to test the new router sled on. And as you can see, one side is not flat, the other side is really flat. So let me show you how I built a router jig that can handle such a big slab. I really wanted to build a workbench that is big enough to handle any of these slabs, but unfortunately that is just not possible with my small workshop. So my router sled will have to be disassemblable very easily and will have to be used on the floor. And I know this is not optimal, but I don't really have any other choice. As I was making my workshop, I had to clean out lots of old cabinets from this garage, and I ended up with these really huge cabinet doors. So I'm going to use this as the material for the router jig, and hopefully it will be strong enough. I'm just gonna make a couple of quick cuts with this circular saw and also with my brand new table saw. And I really love using this thing. It's a Bosch Professional table saw. It cost me a lot of money, but thankfully it works like a charm, and hopefully it will last me a couple of years. A router sled is really a very simple instrument. It consists of three parts: the carriage and the two sticks. So here you can see me making the two flat sticks, and when I mean flat, I mean really flat. This is basically the only important thing to pay attention to, because the surface finish that you have on your parallel sticks will determine the surface finish that you will transfer onto your flattened wood piece. So these are going to be my parallel sticks that I can position on the ground any which way I want to, and on that will slide the router carriage. Thankfully, I have a really flat shop, and that is good because if I place these parallel sticks down, they won't have any planar shift in between them, so that means I won't get that many errors. But still, I check every time when I use this jig. I 3D printed this little dowel jig, and I think it is pretty awesome because it can find the center of these planks instantly, and it also guides the drill bit so that all holes will be perfectly perpendicular to the surface that is being drilled on. Before any glue up, I always do a dry fit to make sure that every hole is centered and every dowel fits perfectly. And after that, I move on to the glue up and let it dry overnight. At this point, I'm starting to realize that I have made a mistake in my calculations, because these parallel sticks will not be high enough to handle the 10 centimeter thick sycamore slabs. So later on I will need to extend them by a bit. Now you may be wondering why I am planning to use these huge slabs and why not go for a smaller project with a bit less tooling and a bit less preparation required. And my answer to that question is, I don't know. I guess I just like to challenge myself. After letting these dry overnight, this is what I'm left with. I have the two parallel sticks and I have somewhat of a carriage. But there are a couple of issues. The carriage slides great, but unfortunately it can slide off the ends. And if a workpiece is under that, it would really mar into the wood, and that's not okay. The second one is the slab is way too thick, and I need to raise the level of the parallel sticks. Thirdly, I need to create some guides that will prevent the router from falling off. And I also need to fix this insane flex that is in the wood. So, let's put pen to the paper and come up with a solution. What I've decided on is adding some thin strips that will hopefully strengthen the router sled in one direction. So this should hopefully add some more rigidity and also guide the router along the whole length of the sled. Now to check my math. And yep, the router fits perfectly. Now the next thing that I will need to do is to glue on these strips and then fix them in with some fasteners. After that, I will need to cut a groove for the router bit to go into the wood that is underneath the carriage. I got a bit lazy and just decided to use this double-sided sticky tape to fix everything in place until I can fasten them together with some screws. I don't generally like using sticky tape because once you stick something on, it's on pretty permanently. So there's no wiggling around and you cannot really correct it on the fly. Whereas with wood glue, you can slide it a bit and then fix it together with clamps, and that gives a bit more freedom. But since the horizontal dimensions of this router sled really don't matter, I decided to use this. As you can see, I've countersunk these screws so that the router sled's bottom side will be completely flush, and that is quite important because this is also an indexing surface. After I tightened down every single screw, I flipped the whole thing over and added screws on the other side as well. Hopefully this will increase the rigidity also, but I won't show you that part because this is already getting a bit boring. But thankfully, my solution worked. There's still a bit of flex. If I apply the full force of my body to it, then there's about 2 millimeters worth of flex in the router sled. I think that is completely acceptable because the whole entire workpiece will be sanded in the end and I can correct this 2 millimeter deviance. And besides that, the router weighs significantly less than me, so it will cause way less flex in the whole carriage. Now let's move on to cutting the groove that the router bit can slide in. I've basically just attached this side strip to my router and I'm routing a groove on both sides of the wood so that it will be perfectly centered, and then cutting out the ends. With that, I have fixed 3 of the 4 problems that I have mentioned previously. The last one is the router sliding off from the parallel strips of wood. And for that, I plan to use some bearings. These bearings will act as a sort of end stop that will prevent the carriage from sliding off any end. I know this is not very professional, but the bearings are a really tight fit, and after adding some CA glue to the insides, they stuck on these dowels really well, and they will serve as beautiful end stops. Now let's move on to the parallel sticks, which I have just learned are called guide rails. As I've mentioned previously, to accommodate my large slabs in this whole jig, I need to make my guide rails adjustable in height. And for that, I'm going to be using this solution. I'm basically cutting a keyway, or I don't know what it's exactly called, but an elongated bore along the side of one of the guide rails, and then cutting one single hole on a flat piece of wood, and then basically connecting them with a fastener. And this way, by loosening or tightening the fastener, I can adjust the height that the carriage will ride on. By the way,
This router jig is really an amateur woodworker type of thing, so no professional shop will have this. Most likely they will have either a drum sander, flatten slabs, or have a CNC mill do it. And I know how to program a CNC, and I could barely afford a small CNC, but no way am I going to fit it into my workshop. So for the time being, I am stuck with this solution. And it's gonna be great, it's gonna work great, but it's gonna take a bunch of time to flatten each slab, like 3-4 hours. Now let's move on to actually testing the thing out. I'm going to be using this charred oak slab. I really didn't care much for this charred look, so that's why I wanted to remove it. It also has a bunch of imperfections, which the routing process will completely remove. And there you go, look at that, it's really nice and flat, and I'm thankful that I chose this charred slab because the contrast on it is really high, so that I can show it off better on video. But in the future, I will plan to use it on all my projects. I plan on making lots of more woodworking content, and if you enjoy this style of content or would like to support the channel, I would really appreciate your subscription. Also, if you have anything to add to the video, so any mistakes or anything that you would like to see, then please let me know in the comments down below. And here you go, this is the final result. I think it turned out pretty good looking. There's some improvements to be made, for example these burn marks. These happen when you stop the router in one place. So I didn't know this when I was routing the table, and I've looked up a bunch of videos, but now I know and I will pay careful attention next time. As you can see, there's a bit of a gap where that burn mark is, and I will need to fix that with sanding. And that's gonna be a pain, but I think I can manage it. Now on this shot, where you see the light poking through, that is the amount of deviance on the surface. It's not that much, but it's still noticeable, so a considerable amount of sanding work is ahead of me. But if you would like to see what I make out of this table, then please subscribe to the channel. Other than that, see you guys next time. Bye bye.